You know, I hear a lot about our ancestors being coerced, or they were duped, or they were ignorant, or they were forced into Christianity. And I would say that is totally incorrect, because one guy with a book, these guys were the war leaders. They were the leaders of whole communities. They held the rangatiratanga in their regions. No one was going to tell them what to do.
Kia ora tātou. Before I say anything, I'd like to invite Mike to open our proceeding with a karakia. Tēnā koe wha. Mike Ross.
Tēnei tō mātou rangatira ko tāi mai ki te tuku mai ngā kupu hei aki hei whakakipa i a tātou kia whae mai i te tika, i te pono, i te māramatanga. Tēnei tō mātou tuku atua mātou whakamuni tiki a koe. Tui te ngā tapu tō tātou kei whakaora.
Āmene. Tēnā rau atu koe. Ai, well, ka mihi ahau ki te atua. Nāna nei ngā mea katoa. Ka mihi hoki ahau ki o mātou tini mate, ko wehatu ki te pō. Ke rātou mā, ka tangita ngā kau, ka tangita ngā kau. Engari, rātou te hunga mate kia rātou, tātou te hunga ora kia tātou. Ka huri aku whakaaro ki ngā maunga o tahu mairangi, tūtonu mai, ka huri hoki o ku whakaaro ki ngā waitapu o kumu toto, e rere tata mai ana, rere mai. Ki ngā iwi o Te Atiawa, Ngāti Mutunga, Ngāti Tama me ngā tangata whenua katoa o tēnei rohe, o te upoko te kā Māui, tēnā koutou. Ka mihi hoki ahau ki tō tātou whare nui a rā ko Te Herenga Waka, kei Kelvin Craig tēnā. I te mea, he horonga e tupu ake kei wainganui i tērā o ngā whare, me tēnei whare a rā ko te kauhanga nui te kura tātai ture. He whare tawhito te kura tātai ture. He whare kōrero tēnā, engari he taumaha ētahi atu, o ētahi o ngā kōrero kua puta mai i tēnā o ngā whare. Koina te wāhi i ngaro ai te tiriti o Waitangi, i ngā tau o te rautau te kaumā iwa, taino atu ki te tau 1908, e nohana te tiriti o Waitangi kei roto i tētahi kāpata kei raro i te wharena. Kua ngaua e ngā kiore. Ai, he tohu tēnā, neha. Engari, he auhou tēnei. So, ka mihi ahau ki ēnā o ngā whare. Te Herenga Waka, te kauhanga nui, tātai ture, tēnei mea te old government buildings. He kōrero kei wainganui i ēnei whare e rua. Kia koutou mā, raurangatira mā, tama mā, hine mā, koro mā, kuia mā, tēnā koutou. Hari ko te ngākau, kua toro mai o koutou ringa kia mātau i tēnei wā, tēnā koutou. Ko taku kaupapa nei, te mihi ki tō tātou manuhiri, tō tātou rangatira i tēnei wā ki a koe Brad, nau mai, hara mai. Kua hihiko mātou katoa i tō tainga mai, kei wainganui a mātou i tēnei wā. So in my very brief mihi to open up this kōrero, I wanted to acknowledge the place that this building is on, the people of this particular place. For example, the Kumutoto stream that flows nearby, that exits out to the harbour, that flows down through from just above or near to Te Herenga Waka, where the headwaters are. So there is that stream that connects these two buildings, the Te Herenga Waka, our marae, our whare, up at Kelburn, and also this old government buildings, which has its own very heavy history. And I made mention of the Treaty of Waitangi being kind of lost for many years in a cupboard in the basement, being chewed by rats and being affected by water damage. It's also the place I think in the cabinet room on the third floor where the Tohunga Suppression Act was debated back in the very early, around about the same time actually, 1905, 1906. So, you know, there is a heavy history. The building that you walk past to get in here holds its own narrative, its own heavy narrative that we have to kind of live with and renegotiate with every day for those of us who work and learn here. And our guest tonight, Bradford Haami, knows about narrative, knows about the power of narrative. He's as you will have seen from the blurb, there's not many things that Brad hasn't done. He's a historian, a researcher, an author, he's a journalist, he's a broadcaster, long involvement in film. I came to his writings first by way of his biography of Tūhoe Isaacs, True Red. My husband came to him from your biography of Golan Maka. What an extraordinary piece of work that was. So you've been long on our shelves and in our hearts, so it's lovely to have you here with us. And that's before getting on to anything else about Brad's extraordinary spiritual leadership in this country. Currently, he's po amorangi at Laidlaw, as has been mentioned, where he lectures in biculturalism and sits on the governing board there. So as Matthew has already said, but it's worth repeating, it's just wonderful on behalf of Te Puna Karaiti, the chaplaincy here at Victoria University, to welcome to the podium our 2025 Ramsey Library guest speaker, Brad Haami.
Kia ora tātou. Kia koe nei e te matua nei i whakatūwhera nei te hui i te karakia, mihi atu rā ki a koe, e whakamuimitiake nei ki te ihoa nei o nā mano. Ki a koe hoki rā e Māmari, me te tautoko nei au nā mihi nei o te rā, o te pō, te mihi nei koe mihi nei e koe. Nā mihi atu rā, ki koutou rā, ai haere mai rā te whakarongo, e haere mai rā ki te karanga nei o tēnei kaupapa nei o te pō. So I just want to thank everyone or Matthew for the invite to come and speak today. It's a little bit daunting with all of you sitting here, but hey, maybe I'll just introduce myself a little bit. So I do work at Laidlaw College in Auckland. I do sit on the board there, I lecture there, and I have kind of changed my contract a bit to do some writing in this particular area that I'm going to speak on today. A few years ago, I shifted home back to Whakataane for a number of reasons. My wife and I shifted home, and I sit in the marae space as the chairman of our marae there in Whakataane, which is called Waraka, Te Whare o Toroa, at the moment. However, today I'm actually speaking about another whakapapa line of mine that's not in Whakataane. So maybe I'll get on with speaking, but I just want to thank everyone for coming this evening. So I see on the board there, there's this title, Māori, Christianity and the Spirit World, which is a great interest of mine. I have that I'm interested in speaking, but for some reason today I wrote this on the board: comparisons of biblical and Māori cultural and spiritual worldview, belief and thought, because that's really what that is about. And so if I was to just give you a bit of broad view of how Christian am I. So in my parents' lineages, we have all of these denominations in our lineage, and I would say that is the same as most Māori people in the room, that we all have some lineages back to the missionaries or the Word of God or denominational thinking that was accepted by our ancestors and has influenced our lives. And so here you can see my mother's name here, Sandra Papoya Maka, and so on this side here, in the Whakatane side, our ancestors became Katorika. They were very strong Catholics. And as a child, I was raised in Whakatane, and we were very strong Catholic families. And many of those families, actually, over time in the 80s, they started to gravitate towards a more charismatic view of the world. And then they shifted to a more Pentecostal view of the world, which is probably a little bit where I sit at the moment. I go to a church called Ohope Christian Fellowship, which is at Ohope, a beautiful part of the world. And that's where we are at the present. We also have a strong connection in our whānau to Te Kochi, who ended his days in our area. So we have a strong connection to the Rongo Whakaata, to his Ringatu world. And in the Ngātiawa region, the Ringatu world is very strong. Also, we have a strong connection through my great-grandmother, who was from Wairoa and from Mahia Peninsula, and where my middle name is Te Apatu o Te Rangi, comes from, and they were impacted by the revelation of Te Toiroa and by the Mihingare world. Many of our relatives actually were drawn and influenced into the Mormon world. But today I'm going to speak on my mother's father's side, who are partly from a place called Takapo, the Takapo Plains, which is between Dannevirke and Waipukuro. Who knows Dannevirke? Oh, yeah, awesome. Just north of Dannevirke is before you get to Waipukuro, on your right-hand side is a small area called Takapo. And today I'm going to feature this place. Also, my mother's father's mother was from places like Moiraki and Bluff, very strong kaitahu, and they were very strongly influenced by the Lutherans. Who was the Lutherans down there, all you people? Reverend Wohlers, who was at Ruapoke Island. Okay, but they also were strong Catholics, Anglicans, and Wesleyans. Everyone's everywhere. And then on my father's side, they were from the Whangaehu River and partly from Ngāti Korohia in Tokanu. And my father's side claimed Rātana as part of their worldview, even though they may not really necessarily be practicing Rātana, but in their ancestors' lives, they were very strong followers of Wiremu Tohu Pōtiki Rātana. So there you go. I could probably talk on any denomination in the room. But today I'm just going to speak about this place. This place is, and if you were standing in the town of Takapo, there are a set of hills called Ngā Kaihinaki a Whata. And the middle hill here is a maunga called Hore Hore, Te Pā Hore Hore. It's well known that's where Tā Peter Sharples used to take his team, his kapahaka team, up that mountain yearly to do taiha and to train for kapahaka up there. And that mountain there, Te Pā Hore Hore, is a very strong place in our family history. And so every time we go there, we usually climb that hill or that pā. So here's me and my wife in the red and some other whānau, and we go and climb that mountain and make sure we do a bit of leg training a couple of days beforehand to get up that hill. But it was a place where our ancestors lived right along those chains of hills. And that is a very important place in our histories. So I want to maybe give you a little bit of context of the genealogies associated with today. So here you'll see the name Te Opekai. This is Hikarahui, had a daughter called Te Opekai. Just for context, her eldest sibling was Te Kaumoana, who had Narangi, who had whenua rewa, who had Te Mātorohanga. Okay, so people may know Te Mātorohanga as one of the tohungas in the 1860s who was recorded giving his knowledge of Te Kauwairunga and Te Kauwairaro. Okay, and so Te Opekai's younger sibling, Marama, had Hine ki te Rangi, who had Pūrākau, and from Pūrākau comes a man named Pūrākau Maika. Pūrākau Maika was the editor of the famous newspaper called Te Poke ki Hukurangi. And Te Poke ki Hukurangi was the newspaper for Te Kotahitanga Māori movement, parliamentary movement that was stationed at Papawai in the Wairarapa. Okay, but Te Opekai was part of a group of women who were stationed on that hill I called Hore Hore. And they became the rangatira over that region under the name Ngaitahu. Ngaitahu Nui, Ngaitahu Makaka Nui, or sometimes known as Ngaitahu Matua. And from Te Opekai, she had a daughter called Te Iwi Kaingata, and had 3 children, Nāhoka, Te Wao, and Whangataua. Nāhoka lived at a place called Tohoraiti. That's where the Paiwai family come from. Te Wao died without any issue, and the man that I'm going to feature today, Whangataua, he is today lived in this region that I'm talking about, had a son called Maka Whangataua, who married a woman called Miriama, and her dad was a man named Hakaraya, who was very well known for telling Colenso the episode of how Cape Kidnappers got its name. Okay, how did it get, who knows how it got its name? Come on, people, you got to know this stuff. Got its name, why? Because Captain Cook's ship, the local Māori people from Hakaraya's tribe tried to kidnap one of Tupaia's, or a young boy, Taieto. And out of that incident came this name, Cape Kidnappers. And Hakaraya was the one who actually recounted that episode to Colenso, who then published it in his, how that account came about. And so from here, the daughter Miriama and Maka had a son called Aritoku Maka, who lived in Takapau, who had a son called Golan Maka, who was became a doctor, worked in China, lived in Whakatane most of his life, serving Ngāti Awa and Tūhoe, and who I wrote, the very first book that I wrote was on his life, who had Popoia, my mother, who had me. And so today, you have the Paiwai family and the Maka family are very close. They come from that Takapau, Dannevirke region. So I want to just share a little bit about the way Christianity entered into the world of Whangataua and his people. And so it features here Colenso. A lot of people know Colenso. He was associated with the Treaty of Waitangi. He was a printer up north at Waitangi, became a missionary, shifted to Napier. He had a mission station there at a place at the river called Waitangi. And he would walk from Napier, Cape Kidnappers, all the way to Wellington and back for many, many years. He did 12 journeys between 1843, 1852. And when you read his diaries, he called into almost every single Māori village all the way down there and worked that field as teaching, preaching, baptizing the Māori people who lived in that region. For many, he was the first white person that they ever met at the time. And so I want to feature a little bit about his life, but more the response of our ancestors. So in his journey, he had he met a lot of people, met a lot of rangatira of the time, people like Te Hāpuku, like Meihana, Takahi, Rena Takawepo, people like the chiefs from Wairarapa, many of them. He was kind of seen as quite how would I put it? He crossed a lot of boundaries, let's just say that. A lot of tikanga, and the chiefs didn't like him because of that. But you know what? They could have taken him out easily, but there was something about him that they actually, I think there's something about him they liked, because he was quite a tough guy. He carried the gospel to the people, but he was very, in the end, he loved the people, but some of his language, from our day's perspective, we would criticize. Okay, so today I want to just really share a little bit about part of his journey. So here's a bit of a map, so you can see Palmerston North on the map, and you can see on, see, over here, Porangahau. Who knows Porangahau? What is that place famous for? The what? Yeah, which is the longest place name. Te taumata whakatangi hanga kua tamate pōkai whenua. We just add pōkai moana, turi pūkākā piki maunga, horonoku ki tana tahu. So tomorrow you can recite that and remember it. I made my daughter remember it off the top of her head in one night as part of a group, a school assignment. But if you see here, he did a journey down these regions from the coast, and he come to these places, these villages, Te Hautotara, Puehutai, or Tawhao, Ngā Awa Purua, just close to Woodville, down to Te Hawera, further down to Kaiko Kirikiri, which is down here into Masterton. He'd come down here to Wellington. So he's traveling on the rivers and going up the mountains. And, you know, those days, the country was very rugged. So he was no sluggard, if you get what I mean. But he did a lot of journeys. And when you read his diaries, you'll find how many people he met there, the names of people, the places he went to, with the dates. And it is quite inspiring, actually, for those of us who are evangelistic kind of disciples. If you read his diaries, the amount of people that he's teaching is quite incredible for that time. So our family, we went to visit this place called Puehutai because that was where our ancestor Whangataua, that was where he lived in his end days and where he's buried. But no one's actually been there since the 1850s. It's under farmland, and very few people have actually been to that place. So as a family, we went on a journey in 2022. And so we're looking here from the top of a hill that is called Poketai, and it's looking down the Manawatu River here. And so if you think about it, Dannevirke is up here along the motorway, and this area here is where the, how would I put it, the Oringi works, abattoir sits on the main road. And so we are looking at this side of the freezing works is where this village was, called Puehutai. And this is one of the places that Colenso used to come and meet the people. It's right on the Manawatu River, and one of the last places you could get up the Manawatu to river by canoe. So here's our family trekking along. It's a beautiful forested area, but there's not much left of what the village really looked like in this time, but we have imaginations. And so I wanted to read maybe just a couple of points out of Colenso's diaries. I've summarized or paraphrased some of the events that happened there, which I'll just read out, just so you get a bit of a picture of what was happening at these villages. At Puehutai. So 1846, on his fourth journey, between August to October, he reached Puehutai from Ngāawa and Otawhao on the 29th of September. He taught 22 candidates for baptism, and he spoke on the book of Jude, chapter 20, verse 21. And if you read that, what is really good, he lists all of the scriptures that he's teaching the people, so you get a bit of a picture of the narrative, right, that is actually being shared. 1847, on the fifth journey, 29th of March, he arrived at Puehutai to be met by a large Ngāti Maro tribal group. Two of the Maro chiefs were baptized. There, a Tōtarapa chapel, 18 by 27, was being constructed. It was an 8-foot wall plate and a true church pitch, he quoted. He preached Ephesians 2:18 to the people. He preached Hebrews 3:1 with Christ as the high priest, and as he calls it, Te Hunga Nui. On the 31st, he held 2 classes with 35 readers answering scriptures all day. On the 19th of November, 1847, he met at Puehutai amongst the Assembly of Chiefs. And Te Kaimokopuna was the principal chief who greeted Colenso at that meeting. They had met at Otawhao earlier in 1846. The chapel by now was ornamented and had a bell to ring for prayer time. Crowded gatherings, and he preached out of 2 Timothy 2:4. I'll just keep reading a couple of extra dates. On the 30th of March, 1848, he entered a place where they were, many of the chiefs would do their normal speechifying. He spoke to 20 baptism candidates in the chapel, 134 at the evening service. So you've got 134 people that he's sharing the gospel in the evenings, preached out of Hebrews 2:11. On the 1st of April, there were 22 baptisms candidates waiting for 2 years to be baptized. 16 could read, several aged, and some very old. On the 2nd of April, baptized 41 people with a crowd of 146, including the principal chief and his wife. Held afternoon school of 144 people. 71 for catechism classes. You know what catechism is? So if you went, before you were baptized, you had to learn the scriptures and learn literacy and under this thing called the catechism. On the 4th of April, we left Puehutai with 100 people on 4 canoes on a 6-hour journey to Ngāawa. The last visit to Puehutai was on the 18th to the 22nd of March, 1852. Preached to 48 people, schooled 54, had a class of 13, baptized readers, instructed 6 new catechists, taught 17 aged baptized people, baptized 6 adults and 3 children, ran a school for 60. All you churchgoers, this is a good example. So in all of this, some of the leading rangatira of the time were these people here. So I've put Hirewanu Te Kaimokopuna, my ancestor Whangataua, and another chief from the village of Te Hawera, and his name was Karepa Te Hiaro. And if you read their lives, they were all involved in warfare, the musket wars. They were all involved in many of the battles against Te Raupraha, They all involved in early skirmishes of the ancestors. They had to still raise families in the pre-European state. Although they were using steel and they were using guns and they were still using wooden weaponry and wooden tools at that time. So they knew what it was to have trauma, right? And they knew what it was to go to battle. And I think in this period of time, when the gospel started to come, they were actually searching for a different way of being. They needed it. They were searching for how can we change something? How can we change the way we live our lives? And at the time, the gospel was something that they wanted. You know, I hear a lot about our ancestors being coerced, or they were duped, or they were ignorant, or they were forced into Christianity. And I would say that is totally incorrect, because one guy with a book, these guys were the war leaders. They were the leaders of whole communities. They held the rangatiratanga in their regions. No one was going to tell them what to do. But by saying that they were ignoramuses who actually were duped and coerced, takes away their intellectual thinking. They had just as much knowledge to intellectually negotiate truth, what is true for them, and they're also having to look out for the future of the groups of whānau that are under their care and under their protection. Okay, so how do we know about these people? Whangataua, my ancestor Whangataua, he's probably the one least actually spoken about or written about, even in Colenso's diaries. You never see his name because I'm not sure why. Maybe he sat in the background, but it's in the minute books of the land court minutes around the lands around the Takapo Dannevirke region that you hear his name. And he's mentioned a lot in the Waikopiro land minutes. So this is a bit of what his son and a nephew of his actually shared in the minute books of 1889, the Waikopiro land blocks. So you had Waikopiro, you had Ngā Pairuru, you had the Pairoa, you had a lot of land blocks just between Takapo and Dannevirke, where these people lived and where Whangataua had a lot to do with at the turn of the century, from between 1800 and 1830s. And so these are some of the things about him. He was a mercenary warrior. He held a title called Kai Kawe Ingariri, which means the one who carries the anger of the people. In other words, tribes would come to him and they have a beef with someone over there, and he would be the one that would take up their beef and would go and do war as a mercenary warrior against these people. He was also, though, as part of that, was also the one who had to make peace. You could not do war without actually doing peace. So you had to know how to do war, and then you had to know how to bring it to a resolution. Okay, so he had about 6 different hapu under his protection. It had constantly come, but that was his title, Te Kai Kawe Ingariri. He was a bit of a wanderer, so his name, he was known as what we call mohoao. So mohoao means a bit of a bushman that lives in the forest by himself. Because why everyone in the Hawke's Bay region at this time left the region and they either went to Mahia Peninsula to live or they went to Otaki. Why? Because of all of the travelling war parties with muskets wandering through that region. But there were a few of those people like Whangataua and his cousin Tuhua and a number of other leaders. They didn't step away from their lands. They lived in those forests by themselves to maintain the ahikā of the land. He was still known as a gardener and a hunter, and he still had to raise his families. And in the end, he became a teacher when the settlement process or the sale of land was starting to come. He was a part of a team of kaumātuas, of tohungas, that taught the next generation in a particular cave called Te Maire on the Manawatu River, where they taught the next generation everything about the land. And they walked the land to tell them the history, so they knew about it when they had to go to the land courts to fight for their rights to the land. We never knew this, but at the end of his days, and we calculated it was around the 1850s, around to 1852, it says his son said, my father was baptized and then he died. And we were like, what? A guy like that, how could he get baptized? Why would he even do that? Why would he actually listen to the guy with the book and give his allegiance to that? You know, baptism meant an allegiance. You are giving your allegiance to the deity by which you are being baptized. He was baptized when he was born, Hutu, the god of war. Every time you went to battle, you were baptized to go to war. And now he is being baptized in the end of his days in the name of Jesus. And you go, what? Why would he even consider that? Is it because everyone else is doing it? Or is he having to negotiate something? And then he actually died. In his death, he's actually buried on the flats next to where the church was. All of his ancestors beforehand, and we know where they're buried, they're all buried in the caves all around that region. Not one of them is buried on the flats next to a church except for him. And he was the last one in our family we would ever think would actually make that kind of allegiance. Actually, he was quite a brutal man. We were never allowed to speak his name, actually. My mother and even my grandfather and them, you couldn't say his name because he was seen as too brutal. Until I did this research, my mum and them would not quote his name because that's what they were taught by their elders. Okay, so my question in all of this, that's just an introduction, by the way, is why would these guys actually get baptized? What is it? And so what I've done is I wrote a bit of a paper. This is where he's buried with a number of other rangatira, which is where the place where the church they built for Colenso, well, for the preaching of the word, which is, there's no sign of that now, but that's where they're buried. Okay, so my view on things is how did Whangataua negotiate the validity of the gospel narrative? Okay, so they're listening to all this talk, all of this narrative coming out of this book, and they're having to go, well, what about this stuff? How do we negotiate this? How do we look at these worlds that seem very different to us? Well, are they different? And so what I looked at was looking at the worldview of the narratives of the scriptures and the way our ancestors in his time, how did they view the world? Okay, so I want to just share a little bit of that, maybe bring some idea of what type of negotiation happened that I'm making supposition here, but I'm allowed to. Okay. Okay. So let's look at worldview. What is a worldview? There's a theologian that I really love, a British theologian who worked with the African people. He worked in the Pacific. He worked in the Asian worlds. Why? Because that was the largest body of Christianity that is rising in the last 20 to 30, 40 years. And he made these statements. The worldviews are the mental maps of the universe that contain what we know about it. What do we know about the universe? How do we even understand it? how it works, and about our place in it. We use these maps to navigate our way through the universe. Beliefs and values are derived from worldview, and they produce behaviour and culture. The maps cover not only the phenomenal world of what we can see and touch, but whatever we recognise as transcending that world. In other words, what spiritual realm do we understand the world to be? What we might call the sphere of religion. So this is what Andrew Walls writes. They will contain our ideas of morality, obligation, rights, and duties. So worldview maps, they're both personal and collective. In the Māori world, well, most of our worlds, you have a community that believe everything the same. They act and behave based on that worldview, the communities do, and they build their institutes based on that worldview. So if you think about the meeting house, the wharenui, the carved house is a visual, tangible expression of the worldview. Okay? Maybe you guys all know about these things. Worldviews are subject, however, they're subject to change. You know, if the missionaries didn't come to Aotearoa, well, the Māori worldview would have changed it anyway. It already did when the whalers came, the sealers came, the big ship turns up, Captain Cook's ship. All of those encounters actually begin to change or get our people start to negotiate their own worldview. They are influenced by new ideas, outside events, emotional upheavals, and the expansion of knowledge. Worldviews are seldom destroyed, but are modified and maintain continuity with the past, which shapes identity. You know, my parents, we all went to the Pentecostal churches. Heaps of us Māoris, we were drawn to those kinds of churches. But we were told at the door, leave your Māori worldview at the door. And well, yeah, how do you do that? It's part of your DNA. How do you really do that? Okay, well, you can't. And so many of our people were shut down. They went to church because they love God. They want to be involved with God. They just couldn't be who they really are. Okay, and so now our people are searching for another way to be outside of that construct of being Christian and Māori. Okay, conversion means turning. It's a word for turning, and is less about content than about direction. Okay, so Andrew Wall says that conversion is really Christ coming into a culture and causing direction. It doesn't mean to actually destroy everything. It means leading people in a certain direction, okay, which I'm a strong believer in. So if we look at worldview, I've just put a few pictures together. These are modern Māori worldviews. You can go online and search them out. So here we have a worldview that incorporates like a fishing boat, a bit of a harbour, trees, maybe they're pine trees. You can get carbon credits for them. Musicians, doing kapa haka, harakeke world, modern housing. There's a bit of a modern hangi pit there. Wharenui, parks for our kids. Maybe that's a balloon, a round tree. And so this kind of worldview is a total like 2025 worldview of Māoridom, right? Of wanting to live in the modern context, right? And then you got here, there's another idea of worldview that incorporates mana, tapu, Māori, kaitiakitanga, that includes the past, the present, and the future. But I want to go back to Whangataua's time. How did he actually see the world? And if I was to put a few things together, if you look at the pare was the three figures holding up the universe. These are what they used to sit on the door of the meeting houses. They're not just a carving, they are a theological statement. They are a theogony statement. They're a statement about the creation and the holding together of the whole cosmos. So they are not just the carving, they represent a whole body of knowledge. Okay. One figure there could represent Te Kore. Te Kore means nothingness, but it's more than that. It's a seedbed. It's a seedbed by which things are planted in that seedbed, but they haven't quite come to actuality yet. Okay. Te Po is the unseen realm. Okay, you could say the night, but it's actually the unseen realm by which things are maybe struggling to come into fruition. And then the third figure represents Te Ao Marama, the world of light where things actualize. Things come to a tangible expression by hauora and by te hautupu, the growth in the earth. Okay, so if you go into a meeting house and you see this on at the lintel of the door, it's a cosmogonical theological statement. Here is a modern depiction of the separation of earth and sky. And I'm intrigued by the idea of Tāne there, but he represents in some ways an upside down tree. Why would you have an upside down tree actually separating? All you theologians of the room, what's that about? An upside down tree. Most cultures in the world have some tree that's the basis and the foundation of their cosmologies. Māori are no different. Even the Bible, the Garden of Eden has two trees, right? But why an upside down tree? My point of view on it, and this is just my point of view, is the roots of the world don't exist on the earth, they exist in the spirit world. Okay. And Ngāti Kahungunu, we have two characters, Tāne and Paia, his brother Paia. They work together to separate earth and sky to bring about the world of light. So anyway, I thought about it, went, well, what is in that world? So I've actually put this together. I mean, you could write 5 books on this, these things. I'll just maybe quickly, you have a realm where Io Matua Kore lives, which means the parent being that actually resides within the realm of Te Kore. And some people would say that's not Māori, that's a Christian influence. But then you have some of our people say, no, that's Tūturu Māori. All right. There you see the 3 baskets of knowledge, and there are 2 stones associated with it. Often you'll have 12 heavens in that realm. Sometimes you'll have 10 heavens. In those realms, you have these divine beings everywhere. And then you have the whānau marama, the realm of the stars and the moon and the sun. You have 70, sometimes 70 deity figures within there. And then I've just put this separation with an upside down tree. Okay. Then you have an earthly realm, Papatuanuku, by which fertility and growth come. You have 4 pillars that hold up that world. And those 4 pillars are actually symbolic of the 4 wind corners of the winds, which hold up the earth and the sky. You have a batch of divine beings. You have territorial divinities. In other words, you have like principalities that have territories around the land. Okay. You have creature personification. I'm not sure if anyone's written about that, but animals. You have animals, the character of certain animals within our worldview represent the ways the spirit worlds actually act. Okay. You have humanity in all of that and the rituals associated with working in that realm. You have concepts like aitua, propitiation, mana, authority, tapu, noa, mauri, utu, ora, mate. All of those concepts dwell within that space. And then you have another layer of the realm of Rarohenga, which also has 12 layers. Okay, so it's a lot to kind of take in and understand, but these are the realms that Whangataua and them lived. So if I was to go, well, what did the biblical worldview look like from the narratives? And these are the things the ancestors are having to actually understand. And so here's the great chain of being. Anyone know that? I don't think it's a biblical point of view myself, so I'll just click on it. And so you have this a greater biblical understanding of the world, which says the water above the earth, the storehouse of the wind. It contains the storehouse of the snow, the storehouse of the hail. It has the firmament. It has the windows of heaven. It has pillars at the foundations of the earth. It has the pillars, the foundations of the earth and the skies. It has the foundations of the deep. It has the center of the earth. It has the waters under the earth. It has the rivers of the underworld. It has the underworld, or Sheol, which is separated into two places. And is separated into Abraham's bosom and another area with a big gap between it. Another image of the same biblical worldview, you have three heavenly states. So up the top, you have the third heaven, the dwelling place of God. It's also the place of the divine council. If you're reading Dr. Michael Heiser's stuff, where you have the angelic realm, the divine beings that live in that realm, and you have categories of angels, not little babies with wings. There you have categories of thousands and thousands upon thousands of that realm. The second heaven is the heavenly bodies, which also align with divine beings being the stars themselves. Māoridom, we have the same thing. The stars themselves are personified to become deities themselves. Okay, the first heaven is the atmospheric sphere that we see. Then you have the earth, which has humanity, the human realm. It has creaturely animation, which is where creatures actually become the manifestation of the spirit world. You have angelic divine beings. If you read through the whole of the Bible, they're everywhere. Okay, you have what we call the elemental principalities. If you read Galatians, you'll see Paul speak about these. What does it say? It says the elemental principalities are our tutors for a time until the Son of Promise comes. Okay, the underworld, Sheol, you have spirit beings in that world, and they're all interrelated and all interconnected. Looks like the Māori world to me. You also have two kingdoms. You have the kingdom of God, the kingdom of the Son, sometimes it's called. You have the kingdom of light, and you have the Holy Spirit that pulls all that together, versus the kingdom of darkness, the spirit of the age, the spirit of the world, or the world. We won't get too much into it, except to say these are a picture of the worldview of, I'm looking at the narratives of the scriptures, not 2,000 years of reason and rationality. Okay? And so here, you have this combination of put them two together, and I'll just read this. Enlightenment. When Enlightenment came, it posed a challenge to the traditional worldview. The natural world was what one can see and touch. The supernatural world of spirit now did not exist. Where did it go? The Enlightenment universe became the expression of the Protestant missionary movement at the basis of modern Western theology, which became too small to fit the larger universe of Africa, which is what Andrew Walls is talking about. The Christian worldview of theology is too small to fully embrace the spirit world of, in his time, his studies of the African world, and I could say of the indigenous world and the Māori world. Okay, there's a gap in our thinking. So, I haven't got much time. I'm going to tell two stories out of those worlds. If we look at the scriptures around the conception of Jesus, what happens? An angel comes, so you have a divine being come to Mary and say, you are the favored one of God. This is what's going to happen. You will give birth to a child and you will name the child this. And the Holy Spirit will hover over you to actualize this proclamation. Okay? That child was born, and that child has a genealogy. If you read the genealogy in Matthew 1, you'll see this. Okay, so I had to think, so my ancestors listening to the story, how would he actually view that? How do you think he would even understand it? Would he actually get it, or just go, what a lot of rubbish? So I'm going to tell you another story. This is a genealogy of an ancestor from a man up the top called Rongokako. Rongokako is the father of a man called Tamatea Urehaya, where you get this long place name, Te Taumata Whakatangi Hanga Tamatea Pōkai Whenua, Turi Pukaka Piki Maunga Horonuku ki Tana Tahu. One of his names is Tamatea Urehaya, who marries a woman called Iwi Pupu and has a famous ancestor called Kahununu, and it just comes down to my great-grandfather. Just so you know, I know what I'm talking about. So in this story, you have Tamatea Urehaya. Okay, he is circumcised, and he takes the skin of his circumcision and hangs it in the house. Okay, got it? And then I suspect they're actually part of the tuahu, the altar. Okay, and then his territorial deity, whose name is Uenukurangi, comes out of the spirit world and inhabits the skin, and then sleeps with his wife, Iwipupu, and gets her pregnant. And she has a child called Uenuku Wharekuta, who is a sibling to Kahununu. So there we go, the end of my lecture. No, well, if you think about it, these are the stories, and there are lots of these stories. Where I live in Whakatane, up on the hill behind my house is the place called Kaputarangi, very famous place where an ancestor called Toi lived. And his wife was a woman called Kurai Monoa. And Kurai Monoa had a same thing, had a liaison with a spirit being that come out of the sky, and they cohabitated together and had a son called Ohomairangi. And Ohomairangi became a very famous ancestor for the Tainui and Tarawa peoples. Okay, these stories are all around New Zealand. Okay, so some people I think are actually, today they're still working that way. Okay, but all I'm getting at is in the way that our ancestors, their mātauranga knowledge-based, the only way that they could understand what is happening with these narratives is to go back to their own narratives. Okay, well, is it actually extreme to say that a young woman can get pregnant by a spirit being? Well, no, because it's all in our stories. Okay, so the things that our people in their days, they were looking to validate truth. How would they even validate truth? Okay, how would they even think that something is true? So a friend of mine, his name's Matua Hakiaha. He's from Tūhoe, Ngāti Awa. He's a very good biblical scholar. We used to teach this 13 Māori hermeneutical principles. If you were to exegete a Māori language or a biblical narrative from a Māori worldview or ngā mō tia, you would use these things. Number one, does it have a whakapapa? Number two, is it connected to the environmental realm? Moi moia, are there dreams and visions and poetic imagery associated with this narrative? Is there whakaaro tuapapo, foundational cultural words and thoughts? Are there songs about it, rangi? Are there tunes sung about it? Is there relationships in whanangatanga? Is there the type of language that was used? Whakatauki, does it have whakatauki, aphorisms that confirm the truth of narrative? Or kupu whakarite, does it use metaphor? And so I think that these ancestors are using these ideas to look at the biblical narratives. You know, I'm not talking about the way the Protestants or the Lutherans or the Missionary bring to that word. I'm just talking strictly narrative. Well, does the story of Mary and Jesus have whakapapa? Yes. Does it have a spiritual world connection? Yes. Are there place names associated with the reality of that story? Yes. If you go to Matthew 1, you'll see all the genealogies there. Most of our ancestors love genealogy because we're a people of genealogy, a people of protocol. Every nation in the world hates reading the Bibles, Leviticus and Exodus and Deuteronomy. Why? Because they're full of genealogies. But our people love it. Most of our ancestors, to them, the narratives within the scriptures are true. Why? Because they're full of genealogy. Do they have whakatauki? They're full of whakatauki. Is there a song associated with the conception, the conceiving of this baby in Mary's world? Yes, because you read the book of Luke, there's a song that she sings to accept this commission. So there's a whole waiata involved in that story. So if I was to look at him, Whangataua, and the other ancestors looking at the narrative, and funny, Colenso mentions that he always had the people that believed, but over there in the corner it was always these warrior chiefs that sat in the corner that he called the heathens. Why? Because they ain't listening. Well, they are listening. And they're trying to work out what you're saying, whether it's truth or not. And I suspect my tupuna whangataua was one of them. He sat on the sidelines for a long time until he made a decision, okay, I believe the truth of this. I believe in the truth of this. And he made a decision. I think that the word epiphany, I want to bring the word epiphany. I think a lot of these ancestors had an epiphany. In other words, the spirit realm speaks to them. Okay, you know, many of the early chiefs that decided for baptism, they all had dreams and visions, all of them. Because, well, who's your God? I want to meet him. Is he actually true? Then they'd get taken up in a dream and vision and meet the spirit world, which actually clarified who God is. And you know what else they would do? They would test God. If your God is truth, then we're going to test him. What would they do? How would you test the truth of the gospel of the God and the Son? How would you test it? In the Māori world, it was about gardening. Well, we're going to have two gardens. One garden that is tapu to the spirit world of the old gods, and one garden that we're going to put your name on, and we'll see who's the most bountiful. Okay? Who has the more power to make things grow? Everyone that did that, they sided with the God of the Bible. Because the gardens grew like that, and probably 10 times bigger than the other lines of kumara. Okay? And I've heard that so many times by families who tell their ancestors stories of meeting in dreams the God of the Bible. And so maybe I'll come to an end there. I just think that in our worldviews of those ancestors, they're not throwing everything out. They're trying to negotiate what is truth. Can we add this into our line? And then over generations, things actually expand and grow to what they become. So here is we're not a big family, we're a small family. These are some of our ancestors who became strong Christians, but they never left the Māori world. They maintained their reo, they lived on the marae, they still hunted for eels, they still did everything that Māori families did, but they just put their part of their worldview into a scriptural worldview thinking. Okay, so that ancestor, Whangataua, this is his son, Māka Whangataua. He is named after Saint Mark, or Mark of the Bible. He was very strong in the, how would I put it? A lot of the chiefs in Hawke's Bay, they held mana as the rangatira over the laws, the new way of thinking in village life. Plus he ran horses, and there's an advert in one of the Māori papers searching for his horse that's got a certain brand on it, and someone's nicked it. He had a son called Aritaku Maka, who's my great-grandfather. He was born in a cave in Waimarama behind the waterfall, and he was named Aritaku, which is not a Māori name. You know, we searched for that name. Where did that name come from? And we all knew it was a biblical name, but we'd have to go through the whole Māori language Bible, and he had an 1868 Māori language Bible, and search for that name. And we never did that because we couldn't be bothered reading the whole thing. And so when the electronic Bibles came out on my phone, I just wrote in Aritaku on the Māori language Bible, and there it was 3 times. It's a name that's only mentioned 3 times in the whole Bible, and it means Aristarchus. And Aristarchus was one of the men from Macedonia who traveled with Paul and died in Rome. But makes me think, hold on, his mother gave birth to him in a cave behind a waterfall and names him Aritaku. And this is 1866, before the 1868 Bible came out. So how did she even know that name? Maybe they named them afterwards, I don't know. But it's an interesting thing because they recited the books that came, they memorized it, they chanted it, they knew every single name in those genealogies, and they named their kids after it. Okay. So Aritaku was a Whakapapa man, but he was a man of the land. He was a man of governance in his little community of Takapo. In his time, he became a lay minister in his day to the Māori Anglican Church at the time. But anyway, I didn't follow his way. I'm not an Anglican. I didn't follow. One of my uncles did follow his pathway. So today we have a family that well versed in whakapapa. We have generations of young people that are they're not interested in Christianity or any part of it because their identity is in the Māori world. But we have some of us who maintain strong links because our ancestors made a decision and that we want to live out traditionally, but also because we believe it. But we have families now that don't believe these things, that do believe these things. We still live in a spirit world. Some of us do a lot of ghost busting. So if you think that spirit world doesn't exist, well, come and see me later. Because that's actually part of our call in our Christian walk. So I will probably just leave it there because I think I'm over time, maybe. And I have written a paper about this that I've sent to Māmari and to Matthew that came out last year in a journal called Religions that actually goes into depth about the negotiation between narrative stories and worldview. And I'm just about to put out another paper that looks at the idea, were our ancestors, are they ignoramuses, were they coerced or duped, or are we missing something? Okay. So maybe I'll just leave it there for now, and I'm happy to maybe, are we doing question time? Yeah. So kia ora tātou.
Kia ora whānau. maybe time for a couple of questions, just because we've got this very rare opportunity to even have these, to have the opportunity to talk to Brad. Yes, so.
Oh, tēnā koe, ngā mihi nui, ngā mihi nui. My question is about how the person of Ehukaraiti was seen in amongst this wider picture.
Well, maybe I'll read something. One of the chiefs, the Karepa, which means Caleb, Karepa te Hiapo, before he died, he made a statement. And he makes a statement about Jesus. Okay, all of them knew Jesus. They all had dreams about him. They knew who he was, and they just had to decide who they're going to follow. Okay, the old world is the old world. They're not going to forget that completely. But if Jesus is who he says he is, they will. They adapted to that, okay? But let me just read something from the diaries, or the words of Karepa Te Hiaro. He was the rangatira of the village of Te Hawera. And on his deathbed, these are the words he said, that an English translation of those words. So he says, "You well know that I have brought you from time to time much riches." So he's talking to his people on his deathbed. And he says, "I have obtained for you muskets, powder, hatchets, knives, blankets, shirts, spades. I afterwards heard of a new riches called Te Whakapono, another riches called faith. And I sought that. I went to Manawatu in those days, a long and perilous journey. For we were surrounded by enemies. No man travelled alone in those days. I saw the few of our people who, it was said, had heard of this thing called the faith, the whakapono. And he sought out for it hard. They were in war. He sought all of the new knowledge of the European world. And he makes a statement that even though I had all those things, my calabash of water was dry. I could not fully be, I couldn't live on a calabash that's empty. And so he makes a statement that I listened to the words of, he's talking about Colenso, and I shook hands with him and we rubbed noses together. Yes, I saw his face. And I sat in his cloth house. What's a cloth house? A tent. That's right. And I am old and my teeth are gone. My hair is white and the yellow leaf is falling from the tawai tree because I'm departing. And he says, but I ate his words night and day. I listened and he told me about God and his son, Jesus Christ, and of peace and reconciliation, and of a loving Father's home beyond the stars. That's where they wanted to understand this. Where's this house? Okay. And he says, but the sun is sinking behind the great western hills. It will soon be night. He's just saying, I'm dying now. And he says, but hear me, do you hold fast to the new riches, the true riches that are called the whakapono? We have had plenty of sin and pain and death, and we have been teased by many, by our neighbours, our relations, but we have true riches. So hold fast to the true riches which I have sought for you. Who's he talking about? He's talking about Jesus. Okay. And so there, Te Karepa is answering your question.
Oh, kia ora, tēnā koe. Was there a sense in which Māori converted the conversion? You know, like reconverted Christianity into something else.
Right. Yeah.
You know, like converted, they can.
Yep. Well, Michael King says that. You know. Well, I think how can I answer that? That the Missionary missionary way was in some ways the only way that some of these people knew what it means to express yourself in worship and all this, having a church and dressing in these gowns and singing certain ways of songs and things like that. But I think when the land wars started to come, so I think the realm of colonialism brought about an institutionalized Christianity that said that the Queen of England is the in-between between God. If you want to know God and be accepted by God, you have to give your allegiance to the Queen. That's actually what they said. Well, hold on. Doesn't the word that we just learnt 20, 30 years ago say different? But a lot of people went that way, right? So I think what grew out of that, out of the land wars, what grew out of that? The prophetic movement, okay? And all around the world where indigenous nations became hemmed in a way because of war, because of colonialism, you'll find the prophets rise up. And then the colonial army will try and destroy the prophets. Why? Because they bring vision, right? And so I would say that the prophetic realm actually created, out of that, birthed new ways of the expression of Christianity that we still live today. The Ringatu Church, for example, it chants the Psalms, it chants the Bible, it chants everything in the Bible. It never mentions the old world. And okay, and so if you look at those prophetic realms, they actually represent, I would say, a Māori expression of Christianity in their own way. Okay, so and there is a lot to study in that. You know? If I ask you, the number 12 in the Ringatu world is they use 12 days on the 12th, and all of they use this number 12. So if I was to ask you, what are they? Where does that number 12 come from? 12 tribes of Israel. Wrong. That's not what they're using, actually. That's what I thought. Oh, 12 tribes of Israel. No, they're using the last book of the Bible in the book of Revelation, where it says the tree of life has this. It grows on both sides of the river of life. And what does it produce? 12 different kinds of fruit, exactly. So in the Ringatu world, the number 12 is associated with the bounty of the 12 fruits from the tree of life, that's where we should follow. Where does that lead to? It leads to the coming down of God in the New Jerusalem. So if you look at all the Māori Christian faiths that are prophetic, they all center around the idea of the Hiruhara Mahau, the New Jerusalem comes down where God dwells with the people. So to me, those are all Māori expressions of biblical worldview thinking. Anyway, there's an answer.
I'm sensing that we're ki te kete, our kits, our kete are full, and there's lots to process, lots of thoughts that will come as we process, Brad, what you've shared with us today, and the pathway forward for some of us who've been struggling to find that pathway forward in terms of reconciling. Being Christian and being Māori is never an easy whakaaro. So, kanui te mihi, kanui te mihi. Kare aku kupu, hei, he tupua tuki aku I tēnei wā. Engari, kanui te mihi.
Go.